Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the Tiger Tank. Now there's quite a few videos about the Tiger Tank on YouTube already, so I'm going to focus on one very specific aspect of it, the armor. The Tiger is often touted as an invincible tank, whose armor was impenetrable to any weapon that the Allies had at its debut, but, well, it's not quite the case. Let's examine how thick the Tiger's armor was and what made it such a dangerous foe in the battlefield. So the front armor here was 100 millimeters thick. Now, it's often said that Germans' tanks don't have sloped armor, and for the most part it's true, but even in these boxy earlier tanks, the armor was a little bit sloped. So the driver's plate here is sloped at 10 degrees, and the plate here at the bottom of the hull is sloped at 20 degrees. The gun mantlet has a very interesting shape. It has near the sight, it's 150 millimeters thick. Near the gun, it's up to 200 millimeters thick, and thinner in the rest of the surface. British engineers who inspected Tiger 131 captured in North Africa estimated that the equivalent protection to rolled homogeneous armor was about 100 millimeters. So the front of the tank has about equivalent protection. Now here's the side of the tank. The side of the turret and the hull, it's 82 millimeters thick. The side down here behind the wheels is 62 millimeters thick. The side is presented at a 90-degree angle, so it's all completely vertical, unlike the front. Now, if you watch Kelly's Heroes, you'll probably know that the best way to shoot a Tiger is to shoot it in the back. And there's other sources that repeat this. For example, I remember in Call of Duty 3, in a Sherman Firefly, you have to go around and shoot the back of a Tiger. The back of the Tiger is actually harder to penetrate than the side, because as you can see here, it is also presented at a 10-degree slope, much like the front. So the hull, instead of being a square or a rectangle, it's a trapezoid, since both the front and the back are slightly tilted. Now, the Tiger was a bit of a ghost story when it initially turned up in North Africa. That's because the Germans, they used the tank very sparingly in very small-scale operations, and if a tank was disabled and could not be recovered, it would inevitably be demolished, and so the British didn't have anything to go from. But in early 1943, as the Tigers were used in larger and larger operations, the British managed to very famously recover the intact Tiger 131 and also examine a bunch of tanks that were disabled in minefields that the Germans could not evacuate. So they managed to find out what really made the Tiger tick and how effective British weapons were against it. Let's take a look at what the British tests found. The first tank to be tested was disabled in a minefield in Hunt's Pass, which is one of the first battles in North Africa where Tiger tanks were used. Since the tank was stuck in the middle of a minefield, British engineers could only clear out a 100-yard area around the tank. So, in order to figure out the maximum distance of penetration, the guns were just fired at an angle and the distance extrapolated. Since the tank was stuck at a 5-degree tilt, it was not possible to fire at an angle less than that. The first tank to be tested against the Tiger was the Sherman Tank. The trials showed that the lower side armor, the 62mm thick plate, could be penetrated at an angle of 30 degrees. After the penetration, a very large chunk of the armor was knocked out. The upper side, the 82mm thick plate, was a little bit tougher. It could only be penetrated from 100 yards at a 17.5 degree angle. Extrapolations and tests against other tanks showed that the upper side could be penetrated from a distance of about 700 yards or 640 meters. This very closely correlates with Soviet trials held in April of 1943, which found that a Sherman's 75mm gun could penetrate the side of a Tiger from 650 meters. The next gun tested against this tank was the 57mm 6-pounder gun. Strangely enough, none of the shells penetrated the side of the tank. British theorized this was because the harder armor was simply shattering the uncapped shell, and this failure to penetrate did not repeat itself when other tanks were fired upon. So the standard range at which the sight of a Tiger tank could be penetrated was about 1,250 yards, which is about 110 meters. In one case, the range of penetration was 1,650 yards. At that range, only 65 millimeters of British quality armor could be penetrated, but 82 millimeters of German armor was penetrated, which left the British with a very poor impression of the quality of German armor. The USSR also performed a test with a 6-pounder mounted on a Churchill tank against the sight of a Tiger. The result was less impressive than what the British obtained. When firing from 100 meters, the result was a complete penetration. At 1,000 meters, the result was a 90mm deep penetration with a 10mm cracked bump on the inner side. From 1,000 meters, one more dent was obtained and one more penetration, and from 625 meters, only penetrations were obtained. The British also printed an account of combat against Tigers, where emplaced 6-pounder guns opened fire at about 680 yards against the Tiger tank. The result was a complete penetration at a range of 600 yards at an angle of about 30 degrees. The ammunition used in this case was still AP solid shot. As you can see, the sight of a Tiger could be engaged from a much larger angle with a 6-pounder gun than with a Sherman 75mm gun. The rear of the tank could be penetrated from just over 1,000 yards. As I mentioned before, the rear was actually a tougher target than the side. The 6-pounder gun could also penetrate the front of the Tiger tank. The 100mm plate tilted at 10 degrees could be penetrated from 650 yards. The 100mm plate tilted at 20 degrees could not be penetrated, but a crack formed after being hit twice from 300 yards. Now, the British had another weapon, their most powerful anti-tank gun that was just arriving in North Africa, the 76mm 17-pounder. The 17-pounder's uncapped AP shell could penetrate the front of the Tiger at 1,800 yards, making it a very lethal weapon. Due to the uncapped AP shell hitting hard armor, it did break up on impact, but the British noted that this would probably do more damage to the inside of the tank than if the solid shot had just gone through and not shattered. Now, the protection afforded by the Tiger's armor was actually not all it was cut out to be. British tests found that the Tiger's armor was quite a bit harder than British armor of comparable thickness, and it actually had a tendency to crack and spall when penetrated. As a result of an inspection of knocked out Tiger tanks in North Africa, the British even said, "If the armor tested so far is typical of recent German production, the outlook is distinctly encouraging. There is nothing like the same consistently high quality that was found in specimens of the thinner German machinable quality armor taken from the Panzerkampfwagen III and Panzerkampfwagen IV. The hardness of the thicker plates does not materially increase their ballistic resistance above that of softer British armor, hence there is no compensation for worse behavior of the German plates when overmatched." So, as you can see, the Tiger tank wasn't exactly invulnerable. Even in 1943, the British already had guns that could defeat its thick armor. However, that's not to say that it was easy to destroy. The 17-pounder that could destroy it from great range was still quite a rare gun, and this was way before the Firefly or the Achilles or the Archer were available, so the only guns that could be brought into battle had to be towed by trucks. And if you wanted to use a smaller gun, such as a 6-pounder, you have to get quite up close and personal with the Tiger. There were, of course, trick shots, such as you could angle a 75mm round off the gun mantlet. It would penetrate the roof of the fighting compartment. You could jam the turret with really any caliber of gun. That's how Tiger 131 was captured. And you could hit a 75mm shell underneath the pannier here that would blow out the pannier floor and detonate the ammo rack. But of course, you couldn't really rely on these shots during battle. The British realized this, and in addition to making all sorts of new self-propelled 17-pounders, they developed new ammunition, such as armor-piercing capped, which was better at defeating the Tiger's high-hardness armor. And they developed armor-piercing discarding sabot ammunition, which could penetrate its armor from a longer range. But, of course, the Germans weren't sitting still either, and they themselves developed armor-fighting vehicles with thicker armor, the Panther and the Tiger II. But that's a story for another time.